Thank you to our MC, Encik Ibrahim Sani. Welcome to IMKL Series 2, where we are going to talk about paving the way to EV in Malaysia. So good morning. Thank you for joining us in the second panel discussion of today, where we are going to talk about the investment in EV, what are the opportunities and what are the challenges in Malaysia. My name is Daniel. I am the Malaysia Auto Analyst in Macquarie, and I'll be your moderator for today's discussion. So to help us understand more about this topic of investment, we have a great lineup of speakers with us. They are very experienced in their sector, and they will share with us their insights as well as thoughts on the industry. First, let me introduce Encik Roslan Abdullah. He's the Deputy CEO of Proton Holdings. Encik Roslan have spent close to 3 decades in the automotive sector. His stint in the industry covered finance, operations, as well as sales roles. He held various appointments in his previous companies, and that includes the dual roles of President and COO at Honda Malaysia. So under his helm, Proton has continued to perform well with improvements in sales and marketing, as well as the market share. So second, in the panelists, we have Encik Haikal Zubir. Encik Haikal is the COO of Gentari Green Mobility. So if you are not familiar with Gentari, Gentari is a company that is owned by Petronas 100%, and their ambition is to drive the transition to clean energy globally. And his current role right now as a COO, he wants to focus on enabling the adoptions of green mobility through innovative solutions and fostering collaborations to advance Petronas' net zero carbon emission aim. And in the space of EV, they are quite well known in being the leader of installing the EV charging points in Malaysia. So third in our speaker, we have Sonny Lee. He's joining us on the screen. And Sonny joined Macquarie's tech research team in 2017. He specialized in tech and battery materials industry. And before joining Macquarie, he worked at Samsung Securities and Bofa Securities. Sonny was one of our first analysts in foreign brokerage to cover Korea EV battery material companies, and that includes LNF, EcoPro, and SKC. He also holds a bachelor's degree in economy from the Seoul National University. So just a quick reminder, if you have questions for our panelists, feel free to type it in the Slido. You can actually pose your questions anytime throughout the panel, and we will address them at the end of this session. So before we begin our discussion, I just want to give a brief overview about the auto industry, since we are talking about EV. And in Malaysia, the industry sells about 500,000 to 600,000 units of vehicles, and about 60% of the market share, or the TIV, is dominated by the national car. So national cars like Produa and Proton, they have great influence in shaping our automotive landscape in the next decades. And EV is something that we can look forward to as we continue to replace the ICE vehicles with EVs. And in our view, in Macquarie, we believe that Proton or Produa should be the key players in driving the mass market EV adoption. So in this panel, we will discuss further on the EV landscape in Malaysia, what are the opportunities to invest, and what are the challenges that are being faced by the market players as well as the investors. So I want to start this session by focusing on the manufacturing aspect of EV, and I believe Proton is best to answer this. So my first question is for Encik Roslan. Understand that Proton has recently formalized a deal to distribute smart EVs in Malaysia and Thailand. However, correct me if I'm wrong, but Proton still has no plans for the local CKD assembly of EVs, and this is despite that the current import or excise duty exemption only extends until 2025. So Encik Roslan, why is Proton not making the first mover advantage to begin the CKD assembly yet?
Okay, Assalamualaikum and good morning. Thank you to Daniel for the question as well. Would like to appreciate for Macquarie as well, Busa, for the event today, discussing on the road to EV. So, coming back to the questions, yes, we have signed with Smart, basically to distribute the smart #1. We expect by Q4 of next year. And for the Proton CKD EV, actually Proton EV program or roadmap has started about 10 years ago, but it did not pursue due to the market demand, due to technology, and a lot of things that Proton learned for the past 10 years. And just to share also, the two models that currently produced by Proton under ICE, actually it can be easily converted into EV, in fact. But currently, because we need to understand the market, we need to understand the technology, and as well as the investment. The most important thing is what I could say or could share now. We expect another 5 years. We will Proton going to have our own EV, but meanwhile, before we totally migrate into our own EV, we have a plan. For example, we start with the distributing. Then also in the plan also, we also discussing how to locally assemble a CKD of EV cars. We are discussing with potential partners, and then only we embark, because this is a program we cannot jump into producing our EV without really understanding on how to sales and marketing of the EV, how to assemble the EV cars. Then we could, after we understand the process, then we could proceed properly on the CKD program of EV.
As Encik Ruslan has mentioned just now, we can expect that Proton will launch its first EV in 5 years, and that is in 2027. So perhaps, Encik Ruslan, another question for you. Can you tell us, is Proton's first EV is going to be a homegrown model or the one that is adapted from existing Geely model?
Okay, that's very interesting question, because I mentioned that we have already our own model ICE that can be easily converted into EV, but at the meantime also we are also assessing on any Geely models that could match the mass customers, the mass volume, because I think maybe I can have the slide to share.
I believe we have a slide to share.
Yes. Okay. Okay, I think before we move, I think basically we have basically currently why also Proton go to EV, because the global shift. We have the case connectivity, autonomous shared, as well as electricity. For connected, Proton has the product S70, S50. Autonomous, we are in the level 1 and level 2. And the shared, other agency has done that, companies. Electricity is something that's new. Coming back to the question, basically looking into homegrown or Geely model, look, because for the study as of August 2022, ASEAN 3, actually the total and EV commands include HEV, BEV is 6.6% of passenger vehicles. And the good news is penetration in Malaysia is increased to 3.4%, so be 13.8%. But the most interesting is to see on the box on the right, basically you could see the difference in terms of Thailand BEV, Malaysia BEV, as well as Indonesia BEV, whereby the top BEV in Malaysia is premium. But now we are discussing the homegrown for the mass. But in Thailand, the BEV is entry level. So this is something that we need to gauge what is the customer's expectation. I think in the survey also, they indicate what is the price, the right price to entice or to motivate the consumers to move from ICE to EV.
Thank you, Encik Ruslan. So, if you've been following the EV industry, you should be aware of this, that a big part of EV is the battery. And the battery itself make up about 30 to 40% of the total EV cost. So some have a view that localizations of battery manufacturing and economies of scales are the key to drive the cost of EV down, so make the cost of ownership to be a bit more affordable. So my next question is for Sonny. What is your take on this? Should more countries shift to the manufacturing of EV locally?
Hello. Yeah, thank you for the opportunity. So yes, the battery supply chain localization is necessary to win more contracts from the auto OEM and battery makers, since the customer wants to establish the local supply chain for stable supply of battery and the battery materials. So since the battery chain is increasingly important in each country's economy, the governments are coming out with the regulations and incentives. And when it comes to incentives, which will be more important to the companies, recently the U.S. IRA, Inflation Reduction Act, came out, and it is giving out huge incentives for both battery and battery material suppliers. So it will be probably, at an initial stage, there will be a big burden for capex burden for the battery and material suppliers, but it will probably the big incentives will be able to alleviate the burden in the initial stage.
Thank you, Sonny. So as what he has mentioned just now, localization is necessary. Governments are coming up with regulation as well as incentive. In fact, in Malaysia, we already have incentive to improve our EV adoption, and that includes the exemptions of import and excise duty for CBU until 2024 and CKD until 2025. And hopefully this should help to reduce the cost of ownership and in the future make it more affordable for people to buy EVs. And talking about affordability, it would be very good if we can have more affordable EVs offered in the market. And at the same time, it begs the questions if we continue to see that there is a rapid growth in EV adoption, whether or not we have enough charging infrastructures in Malaysia to support the future growth in EV ownership. So my next question is for Encik Haikal, noting that Gentari is one of the main players in installing the EV charging points, and understand that Gentari alone would want to install up to 25,000 EV chargers by 2030. So can you tell us more about this goal and how close are we in achieving those targets?
All right. I think first and foremost, thank you to the organizers. I think for organizing this much needed conversation to discuss about opportunities and challenges within the EV space. So I think the technology of EV is already been accepted. What we're seeing is nothing new. It's something that is coming regardless. And we're seeing pledges by OEMs that is going to phase out ICE platforms and moving on to EV for good. So it's just a matter of time. Hence, I think one of the usual things that we keep hearing is the chicken and egg issue, right? And with Gentari, as an integrated solutions provider, we want to solve, I think in terms of green mobility, we want to solve the chicken and egg. So we are putting in charges. We know that it requires a different approach in terms of economics on how to make it work, how to make it sustain while utilization is still at a very, very, very nascent stage. But it needs to be done because it's coming, right? And the longer we wait, I think Malaysia as a country will also miss out. I think Petronas as a company will also miss out on this energy transition effects. So for charging infra, under green mobility, we look at a longer term of energy transition, which includes hydrogen mobility, fuel cells, and understanding the changing behavior of EV users, where I think most of EV users who has used an EV would probably agree with me that only 70% of the charging happens at home, right? and where are the rest of 30% that's happening, right? And I think I applaud government's strategy to put at every 100 km to connect the whole of Malaysia to ensure that people can travel north, south, east, west comfortably. However, I think to really solve range anxiety, it's not about just to put one charger and and to show that it's available. Even now during the weekends, we are seeing that people are queuing at charging stalls. So hence how I think Gentari is approaching it differently. We would like to take the approach of building hubs where the example of KLCC where we built 47 chargers at one go. The up and coming, I think in the highways, we are building a couple of chargers together. And to really make it a comfortable transition, right, to the EV users, right? I think having to queue would probably deter the uptake of EV, but really solving it at key areas where customers really need it is important, and to come a little bit bigger than normal would probably be a better way to really solve range anxiety. Yep.
Thank you, Encik Aikal. So we've briefly covered on the manufacturing, battery, as well as the infrastructure aspect of EV. But we do know that affordability remains the main issue to get more people to buy EV. Encik Roslan, you've mentioned just now that Proton is planning to launch its first EV in 2027. So what is the strategy there to get more people to buy Proton EV, especially when the industry gets more competitive in the future? And how would you define your target market?
Okay. To entice the customers or the market, first I think just to announce that I think it's well known that we Proton and Gentari enter into a collaboration whereby there are 6 items, and one of the items also include marketing of the EV, means education. That's one of the I think the low-hanging fruit that I could mention. But apart from that, I think it's easy to, since I have the slide, better have a slide also. Easy to elaborate. Can I have the slide, please? Okay. When we're talking about the key success factors, in order for us to success in the EV, of course, apart from the strong support of the government, and we're looking into the industry readiness and customer preference. Basically, we look into what are the consumer wants. We look at the capability for Proton to deliver, as well as what the industry can support. So in order to do this, basically, we need to give a confidence to the consumers, to the market, that we, as an industry player, OEM, are ready to provide the products, to provide the after-sales service whatsoever, and also meeting the consumer requirement. So this is important. So in terms of this, we studied, we conducted a focus group discussion. We have a discussion with the current EV owners. What is their challenges? What their expectations? So this is something that we are studying, we are compiling, and we are planning to meet this. That's why the 5 years, as we move on, is part of the roadmap for us to achieve covering the technology. We look into the customer lifestyle as well as the government policies. I think Miti in the first session has clearly explained what the direction, what the policy to support the industry, even now. Despite of that, the challenges is opportunity for all in the ecosystem, from the government, from OEM, industrial, is for us to move forward.
If we look over the longer term, we should be expecting that EV adoption will continue to improve. And in fact, DTN has the aspiration that in 2040, we are going to have a penetration rate of 38% for our auto sales. And 38% of that would be EV. So hopefully with more chargers installed in Malaysia, it will help us to achieve economies of scale and get charging rates to be more competitive and affordable. My next questions for Encik Haikal, can you tell us more on what sort of support is needed to achieve this aspiration?
All right. I think if we were to break down the components of building a charging infra, there's first the land component, the power supply, and also I think, so these two are the main ones, right? And the equipment supply. So that's the third one. So now, what we're facing right now to build charging infra, it takes about 5 to 8 months, right? I think for the similar reason that the previous panel has shared, land, if you were to cross, you were to apply for land, power supply, right? While I think we thank TNB for having a green lane to apply, but before applying for that, we have to check whether our cables are crossing third-party lands, and all those needs to be sorted out before we can even get approval for power, right? An example, so I think one of the results of the poll, I think about 60% of the people participating in the poll said that they want charging less than 30 minutes. So that is, as good as putting at least about 180 kilowatts DC fast charger. And one kiosk of 180 kilowatts requires power almost similar to 2 petrol stations. So anywhere that we go, we definitely have to request for power, right? How do we solve highway, right? To go into highways, we definitely need more power. So then, and that's where I think we need to apply for power, and that process will take some time. But at the same time also to resolve land. So one of the challenges that we are also facing is the lack of process to cater for specific charging infra development. So an example I can give is if we were to put up charging infra at highway, for example, it is similar to process that we are going through to build a petrol station. So then the level of complexity to build a petrol station is definitely bigger. The level of safety required is definitely bigger. But for charging infra, it's an electrical equipment, right? It's just a toaster that requires a bigger power supply, or a vending machine, a couple of vending machines that we put in series that requires a bigger power supply. So maybe if one of the things that can be considered is, a more optimized process that could shorten from 5 months to maybe 2 to 3 months to get charging infra up, that would help in delivering the targets of maybe low carbon mobility, which requires about 10,000 charging infra by 2030. So another thing that I think what we are capitalizing right now is for Gentari, we're fortunate that we have real estate access through our partners like Petronas Dagangan. So that solves one portion of the three components just now, which is the land component. So that's how I think we managed to become the fastest growing CPO in Malaysia. But to cater for longer term, I think we need to look into these 3 components. More players are required as well to ensure that Malaysia can transition to zero emission vehicles quicker.
Just to get quick clarification, you've mentioned that 5 to 8 months to install a charger, right? Is that for AC or DC?
And DC.
DC, all right. So does it mean for AC it would be faster than that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, perhaps we can get more insights from Proton as well, because 38% of the total TIV to BEV is also equal to 230,000 EV by 2040. So that is more than the volume of what Proton's annual sale is. And Proton being one of the industry leader, what could be the strategy to actually capture the bulk of the EV market share in Malaysia?
Well, okay, I think all of us aware the Tanjung Malim plant, we still have a big size of land for us to expand. And even the numbers 240,000 is, I don't believe that it's only solely for Proton. There's some percentage of market share. So in fact, for us, just to share, we have a plan until from now until 2030, until 2040, what is the capacity that we're going to have. That's not just include in terms of the manufacturing facilities, but of course include the vendors. And on top of that, we also working on to attract the foreign vendors, particularly focusing on the EV. Because currently, if you look into the EV ecosystem, none that we could get it locally. So this is something very important for Proton to lead and to convince the investors to come to Malaysia so that we can have a real national EV. Otherwise, we just being exported and just become a processing house or assembly house. So this is the most important. Currently, we are looking into deeply.
Thank you, Encik Roslan. Let's talk about EV battery. Sonny, help us to understand more about the EV battery from the business and the investment perspective. What will be the average profit margins that the battery makers can achieve, and what is the outlook of the long-term ROE?
Yes. So right now, all the battery makers' OP margins are all different because they are in the different stages of the business. But at the end of the day, the OP margin for the market leaders like Samsung SDI, LG Energy Solution should be 10%, referring to, and we refer to the auto parts subsector under oligopoly, like HVAC industry, which is thermal management industry. We believe battery business differentiates itself from normal auto parts that generate slim margins for its complexity of the business and different characteristics of the business. So when it comes to the battery makers have to control very deep upstream materials vendors to making the battery cells and dealing with the auto OEMs when it comes to qualification. And also, the production of battery is a combination of chemical and mechanical engineering, which is different from auto industry, currently mechanical engineering, and translating to the electric engineering with EV launches. And when it comes to long-term ROE, it is currently difficult to define as the industry is still heavily investing and asset turnover and profitability is still low. That said, Samsung SDI is already delivering 10% ROE, although they are in a growth stage. So this is my answer question.
Sonny, just a quick follow-up on that. I mean, if we tie this back to the local manufacturers like Proton, how can actually Malaysia play a part in the growing supply chain of EV?
Yes. So when I speak to the Korean companies, actually, I heard many times from the companies that the Malaysia is considered an optimal region for copper foil business, which is the current collector of the battery, and which accounts for 7% of the battery cost. And these copper foil companies are willing to locate in Malaysia thanks to its cheap utility cost and proximity to cheap breaking yards that provides high quality, high purity coppers from the ship. Therefore, two big copper foil factories from SKC and LG Materials should be operating in Malaysia. Also, we note that Samsung SDI has around 10 gigawatt hour of cylindrical battery plant located in Malaysia. And the reason for its built in Malaysia was a coincidence actually back in 2000. As Samsung had a PV panel factory in the country, and they had an idle land right next to it. But now it became one of the most important production sites for Samsung SDI. And thanks to its decades of accumulated experience and high production yield, the company is doubling and tripling its cylindrical battery capacity in the next 2 to 3 years. So I think the SDI factory and the copper foil locating in Malaysia will be taking a big part in growing supporting the Malaysia's EV penetration.
Yeah, Sonia did mention about Samsung SDI. If you're not familiar with this company, it is based in Negeri Sembilan, and this year they've announced that they are investing about 7 billion in battery factory. So the battery factory should begin operation in 2025, and they plan to produce about 800 million of battery cells, and that includes batteries for EVs as well. So it seems that a lot more can be done in the short term to develop the Malaysia EV sector. In fact, Gentari has a short-term target to install up to 9,000 charging points in 2026. So if we look at this rapid growth in charging infrastructure, perhaps Encik Haikal can enlighten us more on if we continue to add more charging points in Malaysia, how can we link that back to the improvement in ROE?
All right. I think for charge point operators, the factor that we, or the metrics that we look for is always utilization. I think policies have to come together in terms of accessibility of charges, and second is affordability of vehicles, right? So right now, we know that with the existing cheapest EV in Malaysia is about 150,000, and that only allows 23% of Malaysians to buy or to have access to these vehicles. So I think if we were able to put in more policies to open up the market to the balance of 77% of Malaysians to afford an EV, I think that will definitely impact utilization, right? China, who's now having about 30 to 40% penetration of EVs, already having hundreds of thousands of chargers, and they are growing. So in fact, over the span of 10 years that they move into EV with the strong policies, they already started to pull down some of the incentives because of the momentum of NI, and it's still growing, right? So we do believe that with the utilization coming in, I think ROE can be achieved quite easily. But it has to come at a similar point of how while the charges are also growing. Yeah.
Can you also talk about your presence in India? Why there? Yeah.
All right. So India is the second biggest clean energy market in this region after China. Right. So Gentari is a company that our mission is to expedite the transition to clean energy. Right. And that's how I think we approach from energy generation towards energy delivery. For Gentari would be a zero carbon value chain that we play in. So India, they have very clear policies from generation towards adoption, right? Maybe slightly different approach from Malaysia. They look at electrifying fleet in terms of mobility. They have, I think the excitement there is also up to the state or city level, where, for example, I can give you Delhi city has announced that by end of this year, 20% of their fleet has to be 20% of any fleet has to be EV. So then that drives the adoption of EV, and from a B2B standpoint, which I think in the scenario of India, it is more the uptake of that policy would be more better. And with that, in India, we play as a charge point operator. We play as a vehicle as a service, providing fleet, taking into consideration the mega trend of mobility as a service, where vehicle ownership is actually going down. More and more companies or consumers are opting for leasing or non-ownership of vehicles. However, still requires the mobility. Also, we are the top 2 CNI rooftop solar provider in India, where we have about 1.1 gigawatts. So staying true to getting to that zero, staying true to delivering green electrons eventually, and something that we know that this space is very new. As Gentari, we are also learning, and we are trying to adopt that to Malaysia as well. An example I can give you, the one that top of my mind is Alamanda. So for example, Alamanda Shopping Mall, we are installing solar PV while also putting in a host of chargers at the parking. So slowly getting there towards green electrons, but I think more and more policies can help Malaysia to go net zero by 2050.
Thank you. I want to talk more about the export market and the total industry volume, the saturated total industry volume in Malaysia could be a potential cap for growth. So perhaps Encik Roslan can respond to this. How much volume does Proton need to actually achieve the economies of scale? And what is the potential of making Malaysia a hub for manufacturing and exports of EV cars?
For the, for the volume, are you asking about the ICE or EV?
EV.
EV. Okay. Just before I touch about the EV, the ICE, we touch about 150,000 units or more than that. I think is good for Proton to move forward. And considering into EV, to develop a new model cars require about 1 billion investment. But with the current situation, with the EV technology coming in, we believe the investment is more than that. So for that kind of big investment, we're looking something around, could be around 20 to 30,000 units. And that's depending very much on the technology level that we adopt. As we go on the very fundamental, the investment can be cheap, then the volume can be low. But just I share in terms of the earlier slide just now, who are the Malaysian customers on the EV? Who are they and what level of their expectation? So this is something very subjective to give a right numbers, because that depend very much on the technology as well on the investment, total investment. But ballpark figure I can say about 20, 30,000 as initial, but it's still very subjective because we make it a lower, but nobody is really interested. Maybe we produce that we look into our affordability, but that's not what the customers want.
Okay, thank you. Those are very great points. Right now, I believe we can move on to the Q&A session. I have a few questions over here. Let's see what the first question is. Okay, anyone can respond to this. What is the lifespan of a battery cell? What is the cost of ownership? Will it be affordable for Malaysian given income levels? Anyone can respond to this? Yeah.
Okay. Normally we talk about 8 to 10 years of the lifespan initially, but actually that depends on the frequent usage. What is the second question?
The second question is on the cost of ownership. Will it be affordable for Malaysian given income levels?
Okay. This is something the challenge for Proton, because basically when we make announcement on the smart #1, most of the customers or potential customers expect the price below 150,000. And in fact, the car is way above that 150,000. But look into other area that we could see the savings. For example, in terms of service maintenance, based on the study conducted, basically the service maintenance of the EV car cheaper by 70%. So means a lot of saving there. Sometimes if you look into the investments perspective, the investment outlay, initial investment is high, but the maintenance is lower. And then look into the uncertainty of the fuel price, it go up and down. But this is something that can be offset during the ownership. So at the moment is I cannot give the exact figure except for the service maintenance. Of course the initial price, but for us the price of the car also will determine what is the battery size, the range. So that's another factors. It's just like you buy a handphone nowadays, the cheaper you buy, the lower memory that you have. But nowadays, people are using at least 512 gigabyte or 1 terabyte is normal, not like those days. So these are the things will evolve as we move on into the EV ownership.
All right, thank you, Encik Roslan. So second question is very interesting. It's from Owl. 20% of new cars sold in UK today are EVs and moving to 100% by 2030. At 30,000 price point, there are already 10 models available today. So expect that 15,000 EVs at 15,000 price point to be available by 2026. Isn't 2027 too late for Proton to launch an EV? Yeah.
Yes, if we compare with the UK currency, yes, it's late, but we look into the environment, the ASEAN region, we still at the early stage. But I think looking into the factors, the motivating factors. First, what are the motivating factors for the government to push really hard on the EV in terms of the industrialization as well as on the consumers? Second, I think we look into what the motivating factors for the consumer to own an EV. So these are the factors that we could consider to motivate and to accelerate. And for us, why we put a 2027, because we would like to really understand, are we adopting the right technology at the right price? Because the technology of the EV now currently is moving. Then we have to have a cut-off that the technology that we're going to adopt is sort of in the mid-range. What we afraid now is we adopt something that very basic. Within 1 or 2 years, there are competitors coming with better technology, better price. So this is something that the 5 years to give us a kind of input study. Then perhaps to take up the challenge, maybe we could accelerate considering the session today, the sharing session with the industrial player, with the ecosystem, as well with the EV owners group. That's something that we could accelerate, putting a stop, this technology we should adopt, this the model of EV that we should introduce, this the kind of connectivity that we should put inside the car. So this is something for Proton especially, to take up the challenge, ensuring the total ecosystem are ready.
Thank you. Thank you. I believe the next question is for Encik Haikal from Jentari. What is the rationale for installing EV chargers in Alamanda, where footfall is not great compared to other prominent malls? Is it because sufficient data points together? Yeah, is it because sufficient data points to gather from the mall?
All right. Is that a question?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I think, I think on average, utilization is very low. I mean, anywhere we put chargers at is lower than 5%. But it's about seeding the market. And I think if we listen to the latest, on the latest budget also, we do hear that government fleets would be one of the target sectors that the conversion of ICE vehicle to EV will happen. So Putrajaya would host, I think, quite considerable number of EV vehicles. And hence, I think why Alamanda would be one of the places that we want to make it ready. Right? Again, it's either chicken and egg. We can just say we want to wait for the vehicles, or the vehicles can just say we want to wait for chargers, right? So it's and it's about starting first and just make sure that the market is comfortable. We know that it's a very clear segment where destination is where EV users wants to charge, and Alamanda or shopping malls fits the bill.
All right. Thank you on that. Next questions, I believe it's for Sonny. Will there be sufficient raw materials in the world when EV adoption increases to 100% globally? Are the raw materials concentrated in few countries such as Russia or Ukraine? Is there a possibility when scarcity of raw materials would result in higher eventual costs of EV ownership? Those are the questions.
Yes, thank you for the question. So, when it comes to battery material, battery minerals, there are a few minerals, and all the supply demand dynamics are very different. So, firstly, when it comes to the typical NCM battery, so we need lithium, nickel, cobalt, manganese, and graphite for these types of batteries. And we don't really concern about the nickel and cobalt because nickel is practically everywhere in terms of the mining. And when it comes to the refining, it is relatively well dispersed. So we don't really concern about the nickel. And when it comes to cobalt, cobalt content is less and less used in the newest battery. So we do not really concern about the cobalt. Although the cobalt is very concentrated in Republic of Congo, but due to the lowering content, we don't really concern about it. When it comes to graphite, it's heavily reliant to China when it comes to the mining and the refining. But at the same time, we are seeing many attempts to diversify the sourcing of the graphite, and also there are many refining capacities built on the other countries. So we don't also relatively less concerned about the graphite as well. The big problem could rise from lithium because lithium mines are very concentrated in only Latin America and Australia, and the refining capacities are heavily reliant to China, which accounts for about 70% of the refineries. So increasing geopolitical tension between the U.S. and China could lead to some supply shortages in both mining and the refining side. So we don't really concern about the other materials, but the lithium could be the main focus that could lead to the price inflation of the EV batteries. And now we are seeing the lithium carbonate and lithium hydroxide price five-folding in the last 1 year. So this could continue to be a concern.
Thank you, Sonny. Jay Ruslan, there's another question for you. And looking at Malaysia and our experience for ICE and our history, do we really need to produce our own EV cars, or should we just import?
Okay, well, I look into the first. First, I think for Proton or any OEMs, EV something is a must. If we look into the commitment by the globally, many countries has committed to carbon neutrality. EV is something will be there in the future. So soon, nobody or no components will be produced for ICE. So that's something that we have to understand. Second, look into the Malaysian industrialization program. I think MITI and the government really focus on the automotive development. This is not new, it's way back in the early 80s, and how the automotive industry actually growing the Malaysian domestic economies. So by importing the EV is the easiest way, but look how that the Malaysian economy to be grown from time to time, and how that we could adopt a new technology, then perhaps by doing that we might from the going from developing, then we're going to be underdeveloped countries. So this is something automotive kind of locomotive, automotive kind of a locomotive industry to lead, one of the locomotive to lead the Malaysian economic growth.
Okay. So anybody from our panelists can actually respond to this question. Sorry, I'm looking for it here. Okay, so aside from increase in EV manufacturing and having more charging ports, what's the plan to equip the maintenance of EV when it comes to having experts handling damages to the EV in the event of claims?
EV.
Yeah.
Okay. That's a part that I have not touched. Basically, we are touching about the ecosystem readiness. I have not touching about the financing. I'm not touching about the insurance claim. Well, I think this is something not new, perhaps new in Malaysia, but in the other parts of the world, there have been many EVs has been used, and it's involved the accident rate also high in terms of certain EV. It's just like when there is, for us, for example, for Proton, the moment we start selling a new models, could be ICE or EV, we will look into what's next is the after sales. And apart from the after sales is the body and paint center to repair the accident car. So in this case, I think we also discussing with the insurance company on how to protect the customer interests. And bear in mind, because certain percentage are only buying cars using their own cash. Some will go through financing. And this insurance coverage is important to protect the owner's interest, as well as if they use bankers, the banker's interest. So this something is in the pipeline, and can rest assured it will be covered, because for OEM like us, Proton, we have to ensure convenience ownership experience during the owning of the every single cars that we produce.
Yeah, perhaps I can ask Encik Haikal. There's a questions I believe that is relevant for you to answer here. So charging station versus battery replacement station, which one is more effective and efficient? I would think that the battery replacement station could be more convenient for users, but probably not so money-making for business.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a good question. Definitely, I think some validation required on the ground to also learn more about battery swapping. I think there's a few manufacturers that's coming out. I think there's bikes that's coming out with battery swapping technology that's going to be up in the market. I think should be by end of this year. So that will be, I think Gentari is already part of the study to pilot a battery swapping for bikes. As I think Huzaimi also from MGTC also mentioned that they're bringing Oyika, also a battery swapping bike. To me, battery swapping do lower the price point for vehicle acquisition. However, the economics also needs to be looked at, because we know that battery is the bigger cost of a vehicle. So for consumer, it's good that when you float the battery as a service and just push the vehicle for sale, that should, for a bike, I think, reduce the cost easily about 30 to 40%. However, the operation of swapping, right? When you own a vehicle, you also need access to the swapping stations, right? And you also need to pay for that service. So those are the things that also we want to calculate as rightfully put total cost of ownership, whether it is more beneficial or not. Is something has to be, I think, validated, and there are companies that's going out there to test this. So we should see some results soon. Yeah, having said that, also I think one of the analysis that we saw in China, the taxis are using battery swapping, which is an interesting solution because we see this a lot on two-wheelers, where I think Taiwan made it very successful with their Gogoro brand, capitalizing the market by 97% for battery swapping bikes. But that comes with a whole host of fiscal incentives for the manufacturer and also the battery swapping operators as well. And whether that's the right way or not the right way is something that I think time will tell for Malaysia soon enough.
Thank you, Encik Haikal. Unfortunately, we've arrived to the end of our discussion. So just now we've talked about investment in EV, what are the opportunities and challenges in Malaysia. So we've covered investment from the manufacturing aspect, the battery aspect, as well as the charging infrastructure. So from what Encik Roslan has said, EV is a must in Malaysia, and they are targeting to launch their first EV in 2027. So we look forward to that. And from Gentari, they've said that they are going to install more charging points in Malaysia. So if you are buying an EV, rest assured, you will see some charging points in Malaysia to actually charge your EVs. And from a battery perspective, we have the infrastructure, we have the land to develop EV in Malaysia. So we look forward in the future in growing our EV adoption to a higher level. So that's all for today. Thank you to our great speakers and audience for being part of this session. I hope the insights would be useful in making your investment decision. So later at 12 p.m. we have another interesting panel discussion as well. The panelists will be talking about offsetting emissions with the voluntary carbon market. So we hope to see you in the next session. Thank you.